Welcome everybody. Thank you for joining me this evening for this virtual online art opening to coincide with the opening of my private exhibition at Intel. I feel very fortunate to be able to share my work with the folks at Intel, but because it's a private exhibition, I wanted to find a way to extend the reach of the show beyond the physical installation and to share it beyond Intel and, for that matter, beyond California. So again, thanks very much for joining me tonight. The first piece we're going to discuss tonight is one of my most recent pieces. It's called Napa Valley Crush. I was really lucky enough in the early 90s to live in Napa for a period of time. I have a lot of really fond memories of the Napa Valley and of wine tasting. Wineries like Franciscan, Cake Bread, Silver Oak. These are just a few of my favorites, and that experience has stayed with me, and this painting kind of represents the spirit and the joy of engaging with the Napa Valley and that entire experience. The name Napa Valley Crush, it's meant to have a dual meaning. It relates to this time of year actually, where they harvest the grapes and they crush the grapes literally, and they begin the winemaking process. And of course there's meant to be a secondary, almost romantic connotation to the use of the word crush as well. So again, one of my newest pieces. Very happy with how it turned out. There's a little bit more detail in this piece when compared to some of my other work, and it took a little bit longer to execute, but I'm really happy with the result, and I hope you folks are too. The next piece is Lombard Street, and it's really hard to know where to begin when describing this particular piece. I painted this back in 1998 when living in Pacific Heights in San Francisco, and it's one of those iconic pieces that I love so much because it's so instantly recognizable, but in many ways it's not truly representational. It's just the feeling, and it's the energy of Lombard Street and the windy road, and just the beautiful homes that line the street, and just the experience of descending down that hill. The other thing that's interesting with Lombard Street from a process standpoint, while it's an acrylic on wood panel with accents in pastel, one thing that I used to do quite a bit of in some of my earlier work is I would create an underpainting in the complementary color. So when you're looking at Lombard Street and you see a field of red or a field of green, there's actually an underpainting in its polar opposite color. Now the idea behind that is, rather than just painting a single layer of color on white canvas or on a white prepped surface, what you're doing is you're painting the final color, which is the polar opposite, on top of that its complementary color. The idea being that when you have variations in brush strokes and you have a little areas where maybe the brush strokes are a little bit thinner than others, what you actually see bleeding through is that complementary color, and it creates somewhat of a resonance or a vibration within the piece. And that's something that I did almost without exception in a lot of my earlier work. The next piece is Racing the Moon. Now this is my most recent piece, and it was a lot of fun to work on, because after completing Napa Valley Crush, I kind of wanted to do something that was a little bit lighter on the detail and just a little bit more fun to play with. So the idea, of course, Racing the Moon, is you have these very brightly colored sailboats on San Francisco Bay. You have the Transamerica building and Coit Tower in the background, and then as the sailboats move from right to left on the canvas, they actually take off and literally start to race towards the moon. As with a lot of my recent work, this is a combination of both traditional painting methods and also utilizing the computer. I'll create a lot of the different components of the piece through traditional painting methods, but then I'll bring them into the digital space and accent the colors, try different ideas in terms of composition, and what you finally end up with really is a composite digital painting. They can then be reproduced as archival giclées, whether it be on fine art paper or on canvas. The next painting is one where the original is actually behind me, as I mentioned before, organic. This is the least representational of any of my pieces. This was also painted back in the late 90s, and it was painted by hand, and by that I mean finger painting. I literally created the different fields of color and then accented those fields with a strong black line. It was a lot of fun. There's a lot of folks that have suggested that I might return to that more abstract, non-representational style, at least to do a new series that are more in that vein, and I think I probably will, because it was a really a visceral experience to create a piece like that that was not so focused on figurative or representational composition. And it's just one of those pieces that I continue to get positive feedback on. The next piece is Coit Tower, also known as Family Portrait. Of course, Family Portrait before my daughter arrived. And it represents, the two figures represent myself and my wife Nikki, our dog Hansel, and our cat Daphne. And I think it shows something that reoccurs in a lot of my pieces, and it's very important, is while my work is representational for the most part, I also take a very minimalist approach. I only develop the different components within the piece to the degree necessary to have their identity readily recognizable. It's clearly a cat, it's clearly a dog, it's clearly a bottle of wine, it's clearly a guitar. I don't take it much beyond that. And of course within this piece, the most obvious example of that is Coit Tower itself, which sits above on the top of Telegraph Hill in San Francisco.